So just giving a little bit of an intro on your background. So you are, as I mentioned previously, you're the co-founder of Framework Ventures. That's really known as arguably one of the first VC firms to really see the power of the blockchain space and decide to really invest and collaborate and support some of the visionary builders in the space. And yeah, you've invested in companies and networks like Chainlink, Aave, Synthetics, The Graph, and Endowment as well. So we're really grateful to have you here. And it's also really cool to know that you guys have been raising as recent as last year for your third funding round, and that you're really expanding to deepen your impact in the ecosystem to decentralized gaming, to even real world assets and the social crypto landscape. And I'm seeing Amanda popping up in here. This is awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Hi. Yay. Perfect timing. I was just sharing a little bit about Vance's background, and just to add a little bit more color to the rest of your tech experience, you launched and sold your own company called Hashleads and are an OG Netflix builder as well, which is pretty cool. Amazing. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for the intro.
Awesome. Amanda, thanks for coming through. We're really, really grateful that you're in the room with Vance. And you are a very beloved founder and CEO in the space of Serotonin. Your claim to fame really being at Consensus in like 2016, which is like pretty unbelievable, and really bringing defining, creating, and growing like what this space means, what, early builders and communities like Consensus and Ethereum and blockchain really mean for the collective. And you also wrote, I know, a very influential book for our comms lead Day, your Web3 marketing book, handbook for the next internet revolution. So we really appreciate you being here. And as I mentioned, you guys are both, prolific founders, prolific builders who have seen these enormous shifts through bulls and bears, and are still here and are really stepping up into understanding how much influence your voice, and your companies as positive use cases, and contributors and collaborators really mean for the space. So I'm going to hand the mic to you, Amanda and Vance, to begin this kind of fireside chat to situate us in the way you're imagining the rest of the year with this very contentious election, with hoping for crypto to become more of a bipartisan conversation, and your roles and your mindset around it. So thanks for being here, guys. I'll be here lurking to support, and yeah, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. And hi, Vance. Where should we get started?
Wherever you want to start. It's nice to meet you. I think this is the
You
first time
too.
we met.
I don't think we've ever met, but I've been following you on Twitter and enjoying your content from afar.
Yeah.
But let's see. I mean, in my time in crypto, I've really seen a huge evolution in terms of the industry's thinking about spending time in Washington and about regulation, which is our subject matter. I came from the kind of Eric Voorhees roots of the space, where there's certainly a mentality in the space that advocating for regulation or doing too much in DC, spending too much time with politicians tends to be something businesses do that are trying to achieve regulatory capture. And that regulation of the space is something we don't need or something to be avoided. And now we see, Coinbase leading so much advocacy, and all these movements to get crypto people involved. Where on that spectrum do you fall, and how do you think about any of this as you've watched this evolve too?
Yeah, I mean, I would define myself or my views as kind of libertarian. I'm a less laws guy. If we don't absolutely need them, I don't think we should probably have them. That being said, if you don't do it, somebody else will. And, if you don't have agency over whatever the final outcome is, that's also a bad spot to be. And so last cycle, in the midterm cycle, I was on the board of GMI PAC, which was the largest PAC of that cycle. And the team from that PAC now runs Fairshake, which is the largest PAC this cycle. And so I'm close to them, and I work as a donor. I talk to other politicians, and less around any specific policy, and more so as just an advocate for being treated fairly as an industry. And it seems like the legislative question is going to be answered at some point in the next year to 18 months. Maybe Republicans are lighter touch, maybe Democrats, have more legislation, but I view kind of the arc of what's happening is there's going to be something that we want to have input in, and identifying crypto as a political force gives us the clout to actually get things done. So, do I necessarily want to be doing this stuff? I would say it is fun. There's parts of it, but it's definitely something we have to do. It just it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's this funny thing with laws where you have a system for long enough and eventually everything becomes illegal. It's like a field growing over with weeds. If you only ever add weeds and you never remove any weeds, eventually your whole field is weeds. And so it seems to me like the incentives of government agencies are to show that they're doing stuff and to get more funding, which, everyone's incentive is to grow. But if every government agency follows that incentive, and is successful, eventually you get a world where almost nothing is legal to do. And so right now, it's like we're adding all this code. If you think of it like a code base, we're adding all of this code, but there's no one in charge of removing code. And so I think it would be interesting to have code adders and code removers somewhere in the system. Otherwise, it's hard to do anything. And I mean, in terms of just crypto getting regulated, it's so clear that a lot of institutions need clear regulation in order to get into the space. And so just having clarity seems like such a big boon. I don't know though, how do you feel about, do you believe Republicans and Democrats when they say they're going to do X or Y with crypto? Like, do you think the industry should trust politicians?
It's a good question. I would say there's evidence that Democrats have a different view than Republicans, and it's not necessarily a better or worse view. They just view it within the context of their party's legislative framework. And I don't think it really matters what, having Donald Trump behind crypto, having, Kamala, to the extent she comes out, would be very positive. But it is more about the rank and file of Congress people and senators, and those are the people who draft the legislation, and there's input. But those folks are very smart. They're very in tune. They understand crypto is a swing vote, and they want to be pro something. And it's like tech is not really firing as hot as it used to. Banking isn't, all the big kind of industries. Like crypto is a good news story for the United States, and I think there's a broad bipartisan effort to get behind it. So, like, do I trust the general kind of platitudes of politicians? I just need more assurances than that. I need to see it in writing, and some of them have actually gotten as far as starting to produce bills, and that's kind of really where the rubber meets the road, in terms of like adding or removing code. So I don't judge until I see the final product. But you also need to be involved in the creation of that, because if you only see it at the end, that's tough. And that's where kind of all the advocacy and donations and all of that good work, that really makes a difference.
So I'm curious what the arguments are that you make for why crypto disproportionately benefits the US.
I mean, if stablecoin issuers were a country, they would be the 27th largest purchasers of T-bills. And so like, who's going to finance this debt? We could be one of those people. There's $2 trillion of wealth that's been created in crypto so far. That's basically like 2 of the 7 Magnificent 7 tech companies. And that wealth was disproportionately relative to other tech booms spread overseas. And so we're not even trying to kind of roll back the clock and say coulda, woulda, shoulda. We're assuming that there's another 10x in this industry, 100x in this industry, and that will be worth fighting for. And that's kind of what people want. Like, what are people going to do these days to make a living? Like, I don't even know. Even the tech people are living paycheck to paycheck. Like, at least there's something here. At least we're trying. It's dynamic. There's new technology, maybe even a new asset class. And I find that's something that everyone can get behind. But, like we're not creating more Googles. We're not creating more Netflixes. We're not creating more Microsofts. Like, there kind of is this idea that the US economic engine, especially the tech side of it, needs something else firing to really be as dynamic as it once was. And I think crypto is that. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree on the stable coins front. And I'll even add to that. Obviously, China has slowed down its rate and stopped buying US debt. And Tether, I think, is one of the largest T-bills holders behind Germany. And so if all of that debt is being bought by stablecoin users, suddenly it's emerging markets that are buying US debt and picking up that slack where China used to be buying. And not only that, but you're exporting dollar denominated everything all over the world. And you're seeing demand in the emerging markets for denominating everything in dollars. And that's more than the US government has even been able to do in terms of um, furthering its goal of US dollar denominated everything. So that seems like an interesting foreign policy win for the States. But what about, on the other hand, the control of the currency falling outside of government hands with non-US dollar denominated currencies, right? Like, what about the idea that the US wouldn't be able to print more of its currency if there was more global dependence on algorithmic cryptocurrencies? Aren't there concerns that governments have about crypto that you think are valid?
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot of valid concerns. To what degree should we set up a surveillance apparatus and chase down the bad guys and reward the good guys? Like, I think that's kind of an open question. But if you think about it at a very high level, um, like especially on the Republican side, their economic agenda, and I think it is a smart one, where it's like we should probably devalue the dollar. We should try to get exports more competitive. We should bring back jobs to the heartland and other manufacturing jobs that were left behind. But like, how do you do that while you maintain the reserve currency status of the dollar? I would argue you should just distribute it more widely. And it's, more people holding more US dollars and the dollar is slightly weaker. And that's how you can kind of achieve all of your policy goals in one. And the US dollar is probably one of two or three currencies that could do this. And the alternative is something like the euro dollar system, which was kind of the original stablecoin for Europeans, but is a totally unregulated and dark market. And because it's not on a blockchain, you can't even tell really what's going on or how many are outstanding. So almost anything is an improvement over that. But I think, are there other concerns? Illicit finance, seizing these assets, tracking these assets. Those are other tech companies that we can build and, litigate at some other time. But I very much view once you sit down with someone and explain to them what's really going on, like it's not like some like rinky-dink tech startup ecosystem. This is a matter of national security and geopolitics and all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's wild to look at the list of the top Bitcoin holders. It's the US, it's China, it's MicroStrategy, Robinhood, Coinbase, Binance. And like it or not, that's what peak performance looks like. That's what the grown-ups table of reality looks like. And some of those entities identify as nation states. Some of them identify as companies, but maybe we're going into a world where those designations matter less. What else? Let's see. DC. Who's lobbying? Who's not? Do you think that the folks that are making it to DC and advocating are trying to achieve regulatory capture for themselves, a la FTX, SBF, which left a kind of bad taste in our industry's mouth about going to Washington? Or do you think that they're trustworthy advocates for the truly open, decentralized crypto world?
I mean, there's probably some that are out for regulatory capture. I just don't see that as a very likely strategy. Like that was like the strategy that FTX tried to pull off, and that did not end well. And I think kind of all attempts at that similar level of regulatory capture are probably going to fall on deaf ears. There are some things around stablecoins, which, getting a new bank license, and that regulatory process is quite cumbersome. But I think, that is, there either needs to be a carve out, or, there needs to be more exceptions made for new bank licenses. But any attempt for regulatory capture, I would think is pretty much falling on deaf ears at this point. I think the legislation that's being discussed is so broad that it's going to be a more level playing field. There's things that are going to be give and take in terms of stuff the industry probably doesn't like, but we're getting to a point where we need to, decide on what those things are, what we're willing to forego, what we want in return. And I think what we get in return is a much, much larger industry, and what we forego is probably not the worst case scenario of like surveillance capitalism built on a blockchain. So, they can try. I just don't think they'll be very successful.
Yeah, that surveillance capitalism on a blockchain stuff is scary. It makes me think of the CBDC convos. What do you think? What do you think is going on with CBDCs? The chance under Republicans, Democrats of having a CBDC, is that something that lawmakers are even capable of instituting and thinking about? Is it just being bandied around? Are there other countries trying to do it? What do you think the status is?
I think those are pretty much dead at this point. Like, I feel like it was an idea that sounded pretty good, but then you realize you have USDC and USDT, and there's huge opposition politically, globally to this type of stuff. So I think those are kind of DOA. I wouldn't be surprised that none of these CBDCs ever launch, which is frankly, in my opinion, a good thing.
Think we might have lost Vance for a minute. I
Oh,
was about to,
I would
did
love to
we?
just, oh yeah, he might have just left. We'll get him back in here. But Amanda, could you explain the idea behind CBDC for folks who may not be familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So CBDC stands for Central Bank Digital Currency. And so imagine a world where instead of let's give an example of a USD pegged stablecoin that you use being controlled or created by a company like Circle or like Tether, which are the two market leaders in stablecoins currently. Um, Imagine that the producer, the emitter of that stablecoin was itself the government. Um, that would be wild because it would mean the government would have direct control over whether your individual transaction went through. And the
Wow.
reason people worry that this would cause a surveillance state is like, just to use a really silly example, I lived in New York during when Bloomberg was mayor, and he had those restrictions around buying a large soda in order to get obesity down. Can you imagine a world where you actually just literally can't buy a large soda because you go up to the counter and your money won't work because this law is preventing you from using it in an unauthorized way? Or let's say that let's turn up the drama. Let's say that an evil government with bad intentions comes in and decides to be biased against you for some reason. Maybe it's who you are, maybe it's some political thing you've done, maybe it's as a crypto holder. And now suddenly you can't buy anything you need because your money just doesn't work. Um, it's taking this idea to an extreme of people getting kicked off their banking providers or getting deplatformed and making that directly accessible to the government. And so what I was thinking about chatting through with Vance was like, it's great that that idea is sort of DOA in in the US, and I hope that's true. But I think it could be pretty appealing in China and other places where where surveillance and spending are already a little more proximal to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. And wow, that's fascinating. I'm less familiar with that as something that came forward. And are you familiar with why or who was behind um, blocking that? Like if that was maybe crypto community advocates who understood the technology more effectively, or if that was legislators. Are you familiar with that at
Well,
all? I'd be
I wouldn't say that it's blocked, but I know that. So, for example, if you listen to Trump's speech at Bitcoin Nashville, he promises the audience no CBDC. So it's been a pro crypto talking point for a long time because a government mandated CBDC would, first of all, compete to death any kind of non-government mandated CBDC. So be putting a lot of crypto companies out of business, and it would be using this tool of blockchain for surveillance instead of for individual freedom, which is, I think, the motive of a lot of people in this space. I wouldn't say it's quote unquote blocked, right? It's a difficult to institute build out and implementation, and so there's a lot of friction to doing it. So I would want to get Vance's answer on that, but it doesn't seem on the near horizon at least.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. And as we're waiting for Vance to come back in the room, yeah, I'm curious about what has been your approach to engaging politically, or if you've participated or gone to Washington with some of these initiatives.
Yeah, so Serotonin is the largest go-to-market firm in Web3. And so we work with a lot of clients that are considering whether they should get involved in advocacy. And a lot of the startups and companies and individuals that are most involved in Washington are some of the largest with some of the most established revenue streams. And so they have the means and to hire personnel that are focused on regulatory and compliance and advocacy. And they're large enough that it behooves them to get involved in a really active way. For smaller startups, sometimes getting involved in an industry group or in a hack might make sense. But for a small startup, we often recommend messaging should those topics come up, but in terms of their time and resources, mostly just throwing their weight behind and supporting the movements by larger players instead of getting distracted when you're first starting to build a startup by regulatory.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Or if you have like a particular passion for it, maybe that makes more sense if you want to, yeah, hop in a little bit more. But it's nice to think about like those strategies, especially as this has been a day to really get folks to participate more.
The flip side is also you don't want to flame out and alienate people by shouting a bunch of partisan stuff, right? I think there's actually a really nice, healthy divide between politics and business. And I think it's healthy for company culture to be nonpartisan and to not be left or right, to not be, a company not necessarily being a Republican or a Democrat, and to be able to be a welcoming place for people with all kinds of ideas to focus on the actual business mission of the company. And so that's a little bit of my kind of cautionary note is to stay focused on business.
Yeah, we have Vance back, thank you for getting back here, Vance. Welcome
Sorry about
back.
that.
No, all good. It's life. It happens. We're live. It was really compelling also to hear earlier in the policy panel this real call to be like, hey, we really want as an industry to move the conversation away from this quite partisan rhetoric that we receive in maybe mainstream media and really open the door for it to hopefully become more bipartisan or even nonpartisan by unifying as a collective ecosystem. And as Vance, you were mentioning, like, ensuring that we have agency in the conversation as the folks building it.
It's important.
Yeah, but I'll send it back to you. I'm happy we're all in the room again. Thank you so much. We left you at the CBDC conversation, and Amanda gave us a really great explanation for those of us less familiar.
Yeah, I think what I was saying is just I I don't see much product market fit for these types of these types of dollar instruments beyond what already exists. So unless it's just surveillance technology, I don't think there's going to be much of a demand for it.
Yeah, I think that's possible unless a government arose that compelled people to use their CBDC. And I think fortunately, with some of our culture around freedom in the States, we're probably a few steps removed from something like that happening, but not infinite steps. Oh, okay. All right. So let's see. Bear markets, bull markets, we have different kind of policy goals as an industry in different markets, or different amounts of ability um, to promote our interests. The next time the market goes down, I'm sure there will be people getting blamed, bad actors, a new version of Do Kwon and SBF. How do we something like that? How do we have a more resilient um, presence in Washington and in the regulatory landscape that can withstand the bad actors in our space and withstand market cycles? How do we have a more consistent story going forward?
I think, I mean, there will be crashes in the future. I think crypto is just naturally prone to this. But I don't think they will be as exacerbated as they have been in the past. There's a number of quantitative metrics to support this, but the main one of all is that there's no Celsius BlockFi, like they're not taking people's assets, lending them to hedge funds, and then the hedge funds are just punting. That's pretty much ceased, and maybe that comes back, but irrespective of it, how do you maintain a stronger presence in DC? I think you just have to have good people advocating, and a plurality of people advocating, and it can't just be Coinbase and Circle. And I'm sure they're not going to blow up. They'll be here for a long, long time. But you otherwise need just long-term actors that are going to be advocates for the space. And um, there will be times when we're riding high and people are eager to do us favors, and there will be times where you need to spend social and political capital to get things done. But I think a lot of it is just kind of being good stewards for the space, and not trying to advocate for any sort of regulatory capture, because that's the other way you get kind of turned away from these types of people, is if you're obviously just kind of advocating for things that are not fair or not based in any fact. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, it was such a shame that that happened with SBF and that people didn't see through it. And then we get this conflation that he did something wrong that has to do with crypto, when what he did wrong seems to have been old school things that were already illegal for anyone that's custodying other people's money. I mean, what I'd love to see is just a nice bright line distinction between CeFi and DeFi, and more regulators understanding that, and the the various rules being really based on whether you're custodying other people's money or not. Um, what do you think of things like tornado cash? And like imagine Ethereum, where ZK is integrated at L1, and you can configurably have every transaction be private. I mean, what do you think about the innovations in privacy technology and where that hits these Washington folks?
They're very important, and I'm personally friends with one of the three Tornado Cash founders, and he's, being tried in some courthouse, and they're talking about throwing him in prison for 20 years. And this is something that, when he first built it, there was no TVL on chain, and there was no North Korean people using this stuff. And yeah, I mean, what could have been branded as a privacy protocol got branded as a mixer, and throwing developers in jail is just not right in my view, within the realm of reason. But I think privacy protecting technology should be protected in and of themselves. Because like if we're not actually trying to make headway into solving the problems of like if you're someone who, wants to pay someone or be paid discreetly for whatever reason that is, assuming it's not nefarious, like you should be able to do that. And so I'm fully in support of things like Zcash or, integrated ZK proofs that would enable private transferring of money. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a tough space to build in because the government is looking at you like, you're providing ready-made tools for any number of bad actors, which, obviously bad people use cash and bad people use the internet. That doesn't mean you should outlaw it. So that's kind of my view.
Yeah, and I think that most transactions actually would prefer to be private. I think about this every time I use Venmo, how infrequently I wish my Venmo payment to be on that public feed. Almost never, right? Like there's almost no payment that I want to make public. In fact, I feel like I should be offered some kind of reward for making my payment public on the blockchain, like getting discounts from that vendor, or something like that. And otherwise, you'll by default want to make everything private. And it's kind of like communications. Sending value is just another form of communication. And just like we should be able to communicate with another person privately, encryptedly, we should also be able to do the same thing with communicating value. Um, so very much on that same page. I think we're getting an audience question about ETFs. It is very general. Thoughts on ETFs, maybe how those intersect the regulatory compliance world?
I mean, the inflows from these ETFs have been historic successes, and I think they will continue. And the industry also has a responsibility to roll out the assets that are ready for the ETFs. Like the first failed ETF launch is probably going to be a bad vibe, and so I think it's great that Bitcoin and ETH have theirs for the time being, and we'll see what's next. The compliance and regulatory side, it just opens up a net new universe of buyers. Like most hedge funds, most pension funds, mutual funds, they cannot be on Coinbase. No matter how hard they try, it's just not possible in the current framework of how they're governed. So, I mean, this is the start of a trend that's going to be multiple decades where TradFi slowly comes on chain. First, they buy the assets, then they put their assets on chain, and then they put their users on chain. And that's kind of how you actually tokenize a fair slice of the world's real world assets. So I'm very, very bullish on this being the start of a trend and something that's enduring.
It's also nice because it gathers more advocates around the same cluster of incentives that we in the space have had for so long, and gathers around us these folks with more historic, long-standing ties to Washington. I think if we succeed at getting bipartisan support for crypto, it'll be at least in part because the big funders of the parties themselves have an incentive to help grow crypto. Is that something you agree with?
Of course. I think there's so many things that need to happen for TradFi to fully embrace crypto, but the first one is a compliance wrapper. And we're positive on the trajectory of those flows in the space.
What about all of these bills saying that, DeFi users need to individually KYC? These kind of funny bills that get introduced periodically that really threaten to take apart our industry by adding, really onerous requirements to protocols. Do you think we're going to have a future with more of those scary things looming, or do you think we're going to clear away the anti-crypto army?
I think the anti-crypto army, it's like the Albanian army, it's like an army of like 25 people. I don't think they are as scary as they once were, and probably they are fading into irrelevance at this point. I mean, like the bottom line of why they kind of became irrelevant is crypto is popular with younger people. It's more popular with people of color. Many of those voting blocks are people that they would like to have their votes. And so it's just politically untenable to be anti-crypto. And it doesn't, the Republicans, the Democrats, like no matter what your political view is, like the ideology of I don't like crypto doesn't scale to a plurality of groups. It's not white people's number one issue, not black people's number one issue. It's just an issue that, some people are into, but it rarely divides other folks. So I don't think that is a solid policy plank for them to stand on, and I would expect it to fade into the background. And the sideshow bills where you need to KYC as a DeFi user are likely unconstitutional. If you are self-custodying an asset and it never leaves your possession, there is no reason for you to identify yourself to yourself. And so I would never understand why that would be proposed, and I don't think it ever would pass. So that's kind of my view.
What about all these like how we test SEC lawsuits? I feel like they're so inconsistent because Ripple XRP won theirs, and I guess now they lifted their investigation into Ethereum Foundation, but I think there's still some ongoing stuff with Consensus. What do you think the future is of the SEC's role in all this?
I would say, it's if it's Republican, it's basically lighter touch. If it's Democrat, they're gonna have to go and fight with now what's called the Chevron case being overturned, which is basically this case that says in any ambiguity in a federal statute, you have to defer to the regulatory agency and their judgment. That's why the SEC can have in-house tribunal courts versus open court processes like anybody else would get. But with that gone, I mean, they have to now go and fight these lawsuits in court if they really want to make a difference. And not all of the venues that they select are going to be favorable to the SEC's case. And so I think at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs in the industry today are on much sounder footing than they were 6 months ago. And no matter what happens, like with the election, I think crypto is going to be in a good space. Either it's lighter touch or the SEC really needs to staff up and try to take all of these projects to court. And, the ones they win might feel good for a little bit, but the ones they lose could be damaging precedent for the full term of many other coins. So it doesn't seem like that bad of a situation to me.
So would you advocate that your portcos domicile their entities in the United States?
Yes. Totally. I mean, some entities no, some entities yes, but like the main corporate entity that employs everyone, I still think that's the best place to be in the US. Overseas foundations probably still make the most sense, but I think it's like Uniswap Labs being sued by the SEC or whatever's happening. And that's kind of, you do want that type of corporate entity, and I think it even matters what state you're based. Because if you have to fight these cases and you're the SEC and the District Court of Texas or the District Court of Georgia or any Republican state with Republican appointed judges, it's just going to look very different. So maybe that's an element of the federalist system kind of playing out well, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's funny. We were recently doing a little survey through Cero as we grow more global of where our clients are based. And it was very funny. Someone newer to the team came up with, we're mostly Switzerland and Cayman. Maybe we should
Yep,
have more
that's a
team
thing.
there. But yes, agree on where it makes sense to have different kinds of entities. Getting the 4-minute warning. Anything else you want us to hit? Any audience questions you want us to prioritize?
I had one question. If you could elaborate on why TradFi can't participate in Coinbase, Vance.
There's so many different reasons. One of them, I mean, technically, if you're a US hedge fund, you have to hold your assets in what's called a qualified custodian. And what that requires is a federal bank license. And we've talked about how hard those are to get, but Anchorage is actually the only provisional federal banking charter that exists within crypto. And so like, you need to buy your assets on Coinbase and you need to send them to Anchorage. And maybe even then your compliance officer still has a problem with that. There's also, if you're a corporate entity, SAB 121 means you need to write up or write down your profits on Bitcoin every quarter relative to other assets that you don't have to. And so even holding an equity like an IBIT versus a spot Bitcoin, it gives you more favorable tax treatment. It gives you better compliance. And so it does unlock a fair amount of buyers and new participants in the market. as a result.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys so much. In the final minute, any final words about what you'd love community to, take from your experience as builders in the space, engaging with advocacy?
Sure. I mean,
Hopes.
I think one of the highest quality things that we can all do is self-regulate and self-police and create good quality control in the space. Try to get genuine product market fit for your projects, as opposed to spammy kinds of things. Use good projects and avoid and be careful about scammy things. We need more great projects with true product market fit in our space, and more crap weeded out, and more bottoms up things that feel like consumer reports, so people can actually share what they think of different projects, so that we can build a really strong, great space instead of ending up in the news needing politicians to come and intervene. So I think we all have a part to play there.
Amazing. Vance?
Well put. I mean, your vote really matters. And you should vote your conscience, and you should vote whatever your pocketbook says. And I think, especially in years like this, you can actually make a difference and yeah, show up in November.
Great, guys. Well, we really appreciate your time, your insights, your experience, your realness. This is what this whole week is about. And, I think the shared value set of Web3 is about remaining true to who we are, sharing information transparently with each other, and asking all of the questions. So really appreciate your time today and your insight. And thank you for your amazing work also
Thank
over
you.
moons now. So